Hello and welcome to Skills and Automation. My name is Ash and today we are going to build a real-life practical project where we create individual PDF reports and email them out. This video is based on a request I received in the comment section, so let's go ahead and look at the problem statement. So here's what we need to build. First of all, I just want to say that this is an awesome use case for VBA. Let's dive a bit deeper into this request. Our user has already built the report template with different styles of lookup functions and now would like to automate the process of creating the PDFs and emailing them out, and all in just one click of a button. However, I've taken the liberty to code the end-to-end project entirely using VBA, which means that we will be doing the lookups using VBA as well. Next, let's look at the demo. This is a macro file. First, let's check out the datasets. We have a worksheet with student details where we have the ID, names, and email. We have the marks dataset with the student ID, course ID, and marks. And we have the course dataset with the course title and the course code. The fact that we're using IDs is a hint that we will definitely have to do some lookups. Next, we have the report template. This is the blank marksheet template, and we will be building the PDF report based on this. And finally, we have the console worksheet where we have the macro button. So let's discuss what we are going to do first. For every student ID in the student's worksheet, we will grab the related marks from the marks worksheet and populate the report template. This step will look somewhat like this for the first student. Next, we need to grab the course name that's related to the course ID from the course dataset. Notice the course title is on the left of the course code, so this will be an index match style lookup. Next, we'll calculate the grade based on the marks using some logic. And finally, we'll calculate the average units and grades. Once this is done, we'll save the PDF and email it out to the email address that's given for this student. And we'll repeat this process for each student. Currently, I have set this macro to display the email messages rather than send it, and I'll tell you how to send it directly as well. And that's it. Let's run the macro. That's done. We can see 5 Outlook emails have been created. Let's look at one email. The report card has been attached as a PDF. There's some text in the email body. Let's open the PDF. This is how the marksheet is going to look. Everything has been populated as per our requirement, and we'll be saving all the PDF copies on our computer folder as well. Okay, so that's what we are building. I want to point out a few caveats before we begin. Since this user comment was received on a beginner's video, I'll be limiting the code to a beginner level skill set. So no arrays or dictionaries. That being said, we are going to do a lot of heavy lifting out here. Compiling it all together into one flow is going to take intermediate skills. So there is something for everyone out here. We'll be building the code from scratch, but to save time, I won't spend much time explaining any concepts. I'll be mostly talking as we build out the code step by step. If you want some concepts explained further, please let me know in the comments. We will do very little error handling in this code. We are going to build a fully working project, but I'll leave it to you to test out the code thoroughly and put up error handlers where you see fit, as you should for any VBA code. This is the blank Excel template that we'll be working with. There's no button or code in the backend. We have the blank report template and we have our data sets. This Excel file will be available to download from GitHub. I'll put up both the initial and the completed version, so you'll be able to check out how this report template has been built. It's pretty straightforward. The only thing that I want to point out here is that I've used merged cells, and working with merged cells can get a bit tricky. But for this project, the only thing that I want to mention is that when referring to a merged cell, we need to refer to the cell in the first column or as given in the name box up here. Okay, let's move on and start building the code. Let's go to the VB editor. We'll be referring to the worksheets using the worksheet code names, and these can be set in the properties window down here below. The first thing to do will be to clear out any data from a previous run of the macro. So I've just populated the worksheet as if we have already completed a full run of the final macro. So we have values in various places on the report template. We are also going to use this workings worksheet, and there'll be some values out here as well. I'll explain the purpose of this worksheet when we actually get to it. But for now, let's clear out all these values. Create a new module, give the module a name, create a new sub. We'll just set the various values to blank. So here we are clearing out the values in the report template. And here we'll clear out the values in the workings worksheet from row 2 onwards. Okay, let's play out this macro. Check out the results. Everything has been cleared. That works well. Next, let's start building the main sub. Let's create a new module. Now, in VBA, we don't need to shove all our code into a single program. We can create separate macros to tackle individual workflows and call all of them from a main or parent macro. This, at the minimum, makes our code more readable, and this is exactly what we will be doing out here. Let's create a sub. Let's stop the screen from fluttering each time the macro runs, and we'll turn this setting back on at the end. Let's disable any unnecessary Excel alerts, and we'll turn them back on at the end as well. Now, we are going to save all our PDFs in a folder location on our computer. That's this location. So the first thing we need to do is to check whether the folder is empty or not. We can declare a file path as a public constant, which will be available across all the modules within this project. Just note I'm adding a backslash at the end of the file path. We can check whether the file exists in a folder location using the dir function. Let's declare a variable and assign it the value of the output of the dir function. We are searching for files of any type in the folder path, and this wildcard is going to check for any file type. This check files variable will return the first match found. So if it returns a non-blank value, that means at least one file is present. We will alert the user and exit the sub. Alert the user using a message box and exit the sub. Turn back our default settings before we do that. So let's just test this part. Always test your code as you build so that you will catch any bugs earlier on. I'm just going to place a random file in this folder location. Let's test out the code. Great. The code detects the file and we get our message. Let's have a look at our student's worksheet. We are going to loop over the student data set. And for each student, we'll populate the report template, save it as a PDF, and email it out. Let's declare some variables to hold the student details. To loop over the data set, we need to find the last row. We need an iteration variable for the for loop. Let's create the for loop. Gonna create some space below. And let's grab the student details from each column in the current row. The student ID is in column A, student name in column B, and the email ID in column C. So let's lay out the flow first. First, we'll clear any values in the report template that have been populated from the previous run. Then we'll filter out the data related to the current student from our marks data set, and we'll place these values in the workings sheet. Based on those values, we'll populate the report template. Once the template has been populated, we can email it out. And once that's done, we can move on to the next student. Okay, so we've already built out this first macro. Let's just call it. We don't need to specifically say call, but I just like to add it. All right, we'll build out this next macro in the next module. Let's create a new module. Give it a name, create a new sub. Let's hardcode the value of the first student ID into our code. We will use this only to test out our logic. Now, I have a confession here. I have spent the most time on this project thinking about which is the best way to build out this particular logic. The problem is that there are many ways to achieve the exact same result. That is to isolate or filter out the marks related to our current student from this marks data set. And at the end, I think it boils down to personal preference and a bit of speed and functionality. And I prefer to use the advanced filter. And that's what we're going to do out here as well. For the advanced filter, we need three things, or rather three ranges. Let's declare them as range variables. The list range is the one that will be applying the filter on. So this is the marks data set. Let's just assign it to our range variable. Then we need the criteria range. This is the value that we'll be filtering on, which is basically one student ID at a time. Let's go to the workings worksheet, and this cells A1 and A2 will be our criteria range. We do need to provide the header, and we'll place the first student ID directly below it. So first we'll add the student ID below the header into A2, and we'll assign the whole range to our criteria range variable. And finally, we need to provide the copy to range, which is the location where we'll be pasting our data. Let's check out the workings worksheet again. We'll be pasting our data out here into columns D and E. Again, we do need to provide the headers, and the headers need to exactly match the headers of the data set from where we are copying. And for the copy to range, we just need to provide the range that contains the headers. So let's do that. Now let's call the advanced filter function, which is a method of the range object. So we want to copy, select that. Let's first provide the criteria range. Next, we'll give the copy to range. And we don't really need unique values, so we'll just set it to false. And that's it. Let's run this macro. Remember, since we've hard coded just this student ID above out here, it will run only for this particular student. Let's play it out. Something is not set correctly. No problem. Let's just have a look. I bet one of these ranges is set incorrectly. Range list is the current region of A1. That's correct. Range criteria is A1, and on the workings worksheet, that looks correct as well. And the copy to range is D1 to F1. I think that's too much. It's actually just D to E. We can't feed in blank columns, so that's our mistake. We need to set it to the exact copy to range. Okay, let's stop this and play it out again. Okay, that ran. Come out here. So we have a student ID and all the course IDs and marks that are related just to this student ID. Great. So this runs as expected. In our next step, we will transfer these values from the workings worksheet onto the reports template. But we have one more thing to do. We need to call this macro from our parent macro, which we are building out here. And it needs to run for all the student IDs and not just this hard-coded one. So let's comment out these statements, and we'll pass the student ID as a parameter into this sub-procedure instead. And let's call this sub-procedure from our main macro. So we're doing it out here. Let's save this and let's test it out. So we'll put a code break next to our next iteration, and let's run this macro. I've defined my student ID as an S. I'm going to correct it here as well. It does not need to match exactly what's on the main macro, but for this project, we'll match our parameters and the main variables. Okay, so I think that's the only issue. Stop this, play again. So the first iteration of this for loop has run. Come to our workings worksheet. The first student ID has been populated. Let's run it once more. Go back to the workings worksheet, and the second student ID and the related values have been populated. So this macro should work fine until now. Okay, so we have isolated the marks related to the student ID in the current iteration of the for loop. And next, let's populate the report template. Let's create a new module and create a new sub. Same as last time, let's populate some testing values. So in this module, we are going to populate the report template. Student ID and name will go into B8 and B9. So first off, let's populate those values. Next, we'll take the marks that we had filtered in the previous macro and transfer them onto the reports worksheet into row 13 onwards. The assumption here is that there will be a maximum of 5 courses per report card. Otherwise, the results could spill over. So that's one constraint that we need to be aware of. Let's loop over the data set in the workings worksheet. So we need the last row and the iteration variable. Let's create the for loop. Okay, so one thing that I'm going to point out is that we're going to attempt to loop over this data set regardless of whether our filtering found any results for a particular student ID in the marks worksheet or not, which means that there is a possibility that there is no marks for a particular student ID. So if no filtered marks are found, then we need to kind of ignore the current iteration of the loop and move on to the next iteration or the next student ID. But I'm not going to put in that condition out here because this is one of the many error handling scenarios that you would need to cater for, and I'll leave it up to you to build out that logic. So back to the for loop within the report template logic. So the value in column D on the reportings worksheet in the 13th row onwards, which is 2 or the first value of I plus 11, which gives us 13. So this value is equal to the current value in column D in the workings worksheet. And similarly, we can transfer the marks as well. Okay, let's save this and test out what we have so far. Clear this out, go to the reports template. We have the student ID and name and the code and the marks in the right columns. Fantastic. Now that we have the course codes, we can get the course names from the course worksheet and populate back into our first column. So now we will loop over this range in our reports worksheet and do a lookup on the course code using the Range.Find method. The Range.Find method returns a range object, which is the range where the match was found. Gonna make some space out here. So this is our variable for the range object. Let's declare some variables to hold the course details. Let's create our loop. It's going to start from the 13th row on the reports worksheet through to, so I'm just going to write this out for now and we will just explain this in a bit. Okay, so this value of the last row for our for loop is interesting. Let's decode this. The total rows in our range is just the last row variable minus 1 since it includes the header row as well. And we need to subtract one more 1 if, for example, say we need to loop for 7 rows from the 13th row onwards, including the 13th row, then we need to loop until the 19th row and not row 20. So in that case, the logic would be 13 plus 7 minus 1 minus 1. And if you're still confused on this, feed in the last row value into this formula and try and work this out for yourself. Okay, so moving on. Let's first grab the course ID, which is in column D on the reports worksheet. And let's create the Range.Find logic. Range.Find represents a range, which is an object. Hence, we use the set variable to assign the value. We need to specify the range that we'll be looking up this course IDs within. And this will be the column B in the course worksheet. Notice that we'll be performing a lookup to the left and grabbing a value from column A, which is like an index match and which is pretty cool. All right, so let's set this value. I'm going to move on to a new line of code and we can extend our code using this underscore. Okay, so what are we looking for? We're looking for the course ID. And we want to search the values within each cell as opposed to within any formulas or comments. If a match is found, the Range.Find variable will contain the matching cell in column B in the course ID sheet, and it will be stored as a range object. So if this range object is not null, or if it is not nothing, then we will grab the value from the first cell to the left of this cell. So basically from column A. And we can use the offset function for this. We want to stay in the same row, so the row value will be 0. And we want to move to the left, so we are offsetting by minus 1. And let's just place this value into column A on our reports worksheet. Okay, we are still in this for loop, which is looping from top to down on our reports template. So let's make full use of the loop. To the right here in column F are the marks. And we can use it to calculate the grades in column H. Let's do that. We'll build out the calculation logic for the grade as a separate function. A new module, and let's create a new function. We are creating a function here because unlike the previous 2 times, here we'll be actually returning a value. What I'm going to do is just paste out the logic of the code and let's just talk through what's going on. The marks are evaluated out of 1000. We will use the select case statement to evaluate the marks that we are passing through the parameter of this function. Select case is a neater way to write out a giant nested if logic, especially if you're evaluating the same expression. So here we are saying if the marks are greater than or equal to 900, we'll assign a grade of A. Similarly, assign a grade of B for marks greater than equal to 800. And a similar logic for grade C and D. And for any grade below 600, we'll assign the grade F. This grade variable will hold the assigned grade. And once this select logic is complete, we'll return the grade value back into the function. So let's go back to our previous code. We can add some more variables above our for loop. Let's grab the marks from column F on a report worksheet, and we can calculate the grades based on these marks. That is an L in front of it. And we'll assign the calculated grade to the current value in column H, which is basically out here. And one final thing, since we are already in the loop, we can calculate the total marks or the total units as we loop through the data set. So the total units, I'm using units and marks synonymously. This is going to be a cumulative function, which will be the current value of marks from column F, and we'll add it to the cumulative total from the previous iteration of this loop. Okay, let's come out of this loop. So let's calculate the average marks. So this is just the total marks or the total units divided by the number of rows minus 1 because of the header. And based on the average units, we can calculate our average grade using the function that we had created earlier. And let's place both these values into cells H20 and H21 on our reporting's worksheet. Whoa, I really liked building this macro. There is so much different logic out here, which keeps things interesting. Okay, let's play this macro out. Remember, we've hard-coded the student ID and name out here. Let's run the macro. Go to the report worksheet. We have our course names, we have our grades, and the average marks and the average grade. So the last thing to do is comment out these testing variables. We'll add the two variables as parameters, and we can call this macro from our parent macro. And you can test if this logic is working through the parent macro as well, but I'm not going to do that. Let's push on further. In the final section, we will save this report template as a PDF and email it out as an attachment to the student. Let's create a new module and a new sub, add a testing variable. First, we're going to save this report template as a separate PDF. We will need to provide the file name, including the file path. The file name will just be the student ID, and we can add the extension name .pdf to it. And let's append the file path, which is basically this constant that we had saved above the main macro. And since it's a public constant, we can call it from a separate module. So our full file path is the folder path and the file name. And we can export just the report worksheet as a PDF format. And we need to provide the file name as well. And let's test it out. Go to our folder location. We can see one file has been saved. Let's open it. And our reporting worksheet has been successfully saved as a PDF. Next, let's grab the email ID for the student, which is in the third column of the student's sheet, which is basically offset 2 columns from the student ID. So let's do a lookup. We've already done this logic before for course IDs. So here we are searching for the student ID in the column A of the student's worksheet. And if a match is found, we will grab the email ID, which is basically offset by 2 columns to the right of the current cell. And finally, we can send the email. We will do this in a separate macro. Create a new module, new sub. We'll be passing through the file name that we want to attach and the email address that we found in the previous macro. I've covered sending emails extensively on this channel. Please check out some of my videos on this topic for more details. I'm just going to briefly go through the steps out here. First, we need to connect to the Outlook application by initializing a separate object. And using that Outlook object, we can create an email object, which will basically represent an email. And now we can set the properties of the email. Let's add the send to address, which is the email variable that we are passing through the parameter of this function. No CC or BCC. Subject can be report card. We will add just a basic body to the email, and you can get super creative out here, like adding the student names, which would be like sending a personalized email. We could add the average grade, etc., etc. Check out my other videos to see what all options you have. Next, we'll add one attachment, which is the file name that we are passing through as a parameter, and we can send the email out. But I'm going to comment this out. I don't want to send out these emails because I've fed in dummy email addresses. I will display them instead. Display is a good option for testing purposes. When you are satisfied with your code, you can comment the display method and then remove the comment on the send method. Let's change that back. Save this. Let's call this email sub procedure from our previous macro. Save this as well. Let's test it out. Looks like there is a mistake with the path or the file name. Let's check it out. Right, we can hover over this variable. It is just displaying the file name as opposed to the file path and the file name. We should be adding the full file path out here instead of the file name. So let's do that. Stop, go back out here. Just gonna change these to the full file path. Let's try again. And we have our email. Here's our email body. The sender email address has been populated correctly, the subject as well, and we have our PDF attached. So all of that works. What is left is to comment out the testing variables, add them as a string, and let's call this sub procedure from our main macro. Okay, and that's the entire macro. In the next module, we will just test this macro out end to end and add a button onto our console worksheet so that we can run a process basically at the click of a button. So far we have built out the entire macro. All that remains is to actually test it. So let's do that. Let's run this macro. Something is happening and that's done. 5 PDF copies have been saved for our 5 students. And we can see below that 5 emails have been generated. Let's check out one email. And this is just displaying the messages. And as I said previously, if you just want to send the emails, remove the comment on send and add a comment to display. All that remains is creating a button and assigning a macro to it. Let's go to our developer tab, insert, click on the button icon under the forms control. And we'll assign the main macro. And just edit the text to say run. And that's it. I'm not going to play it out again because we already know that it works. And that was the video. Links for the code and the files will be provided in the description. Hope you liked the video. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.